To truly grasp the premise of Plato expose the hidden lack of female desire, we first need to understand Plato's complex and often abstract concept of desire, or eros. For Plato, eros was far more than mere physical attraction or sexual longing. It was a fundamental philosophical force, an intense yearning that propelled the soul towards what it perceived as the good, the beautiful, and ultimately the timeless forms. Perfect, unchanging essences of reality existing independently of the material world. This journey of Eros was depicted as an ascent, starting from appreciation for physical beauty, moving through the beauty of character, laws, and knowledge, and culminating in the contemplation of the form of beauty itself, which is synonymous with the good. This philosophical Eros was the engine of intellectual and spiritual growth. Plato articulated this concept most famously in the Symposium, where characters like Socrates describe this hierarchical ascent of desire. The lover, initially drawn to a beautiful body, learns to appreciate the beauty of all bodies, then the beauty of souls, then laws and customs, and finally, the forms themselves. This journey was seen as the path to true wisdom and virtue. The hidden lack of female desire in Plato's thought isn't about women being incapable of physical desire. It's about their perceived capacity for this higher philosophical eros. Plato's writings, reflecting the societal norms of ancient Athens, frequently presented a gendered application of this philosophical drive. In his ideal state, as outlined in works like The Republic, women, while acknowledged as capable of reason and potentially holding roles in his guardian class, though this was a radical notion for his time, were generally seen as more closely tied to the material and mutable world. Their primary societal function was often depicted as being related to the household, procreation, and the nurturing of children. This implicitly positioned them as less suited, or at least less driven, by the rigorous, abstract, and often disembodied pursuit of philosophical truth that characterized the ascent of Eros. For instance, in discussions about the soul's ability to transcend the physical realm, to grasp the forms, male philosophers are typically the protagonists, the ones embarking on this arduous intellectual journey. Women, by contrast, are rarely portrayed as having this innate philosophical yearning or being engaged in the kind of abstract reasoning necessary for the highest forms of Eros. Their desires, when addressed, were often relegated to the realm of reproduction or domestic harmony, rather than the pursuit of transcendent knowledge or civic virtue through philosophical inquiry. Therefore, the hidden lack that no one noticed in Plato's philosophy wasn't a claim that women lacked all desire, but rather that they were often excluded from or not seen as primary participants in this specific, higher form of philosophical desire. Plato's dialogues, while groundbreaking in many ways, inherently reflected the limitations of his historical context, where the male mind was typically assumed to be the principal vehicle for abstract thought and spiritual ascent. This systemic exclusion, rather than a direct statement of deficit, allowed the lack of a certain kind of female desire to remain largely unnoticed within the dominant philosophical discourse of his time. To truly understand the hidden lack of female desire that Plato might have exposed, or rather reflected, it's crucial to contextualize his philosophical ideas within the societal realities of ancient Greece, particularly Athens. Ancient Greek society was overwhelmingly patriarchal, a reality that deeply shaped every aspect of life, from legal status to public roles, and crucially, the expression of desire itself. Women, especially free-born Athenian citizens, lived lives largely confined to the domestic sphere. Their primary societal function was reproduction and managing the household, with their public presence and voice severely restricted. In this cultural milieu, the expression of female desire, particularly any desire that diverged from domesticity or procreation, was viewed with suspicion, if not outright condemnation. While male citizens engaged in public discourse, philosophy, politics, and homosocial relationships, like pederasty, that were openly discussed and even celebrated, women's sexuality and desires were heavily controlled and monitored. A woman expressing independent intellectual curiosity, political ambition, or overt sexual desire outside marital bounds risked her reputation and social standing, often being equated with lower-status women like hetaerae, courtesans, who, ironically, sometimes had more intellectual freedom but lacked the societal protection of citizen wives. This leads to the core of the cultural repression. Female desire wasn't necessarily absent, but it was rigorously suppressed, dismissed, or rigidly channeled. Any manifestation of desire for knowledge, autonomy, public recognition, or even active sexual agency was culturally deemed inappropriate for citizen women. Their desire was expected to be limited to ensuring the household's smooth operation and bearing legitimate heirs. The very structures of society effectively silenced or redirected female desire into narrow, acceptable pathways, making it hidden, not because it didn't exist, but because it wasn't permitted to manifest openly in diverse forms. Plato, as a product of his time, inevitably reflected these societal norms in his philosophical works. While his Republic did contain progressive ideas about women's potential in the guardian class, these were highly theoretical and presented as exceptions to the norm. For the vast majority of women in his envisioned state, and certainly in the Athens he lived in, their roles were traditional. Thus, when Plato discussed Eros as an ascent to abstract forms, the very societal structures he knew and implicitly often reinforced meant that women were less likely to be seen as participants in this grand philosophical quest. Their lives, by design, offered fewer avenues for the expression of intellectual Eros. Therefore, the hidden lack that no one noticed can be interpreted as the normalization of this cultural repression. It wasn't that women didn't have desire, but that the dominant male-centric philosophical and social discourse simply didn't acknowledge or account for the breadth and depth of female desire beyond its procreative or domestic function. Plato's philosophical framework, while revolutionary in other ways, implicitly echoed this societal blind spot, making the absence of overtly expressed or philosophically recognized female desire seem natural or unremarkable within the male intellectual sphere. The lack was a product of a society that didn't allow for its open manifestation or conceptualization in the same elevated terms applied to men. While Plato's philosophical framework, as discussed, reflected a societal context that implicitly obscured or limited the expression of female desire, Carl Jung's analytical psychology offers a radical counter-perspective. Jung would reveal that any apparent lack of female desire is not an intrinsic psychological reality, but rather a cultural repression that forces universal human drives into indirect or unconscious manifestations. Central to this understanding are Jung's concepts of the anima and animus archetypes. Jung posited that every individual, regardless of their biological sex, possesses an unconscious contrasexual component. The anima is the feminine aspect in a man's unconscious, and the animus is the masculine aspect in a woman's unconscious. These aren't merely personal complexes, they are archetypal images, inherited patterns of the collective unconscious that represent the totality of human experience. The anima embodies qualities like receptivity, emotionality, intuition, and connection to the inner world, while the animus represents qualities such as assertiveness, rationality, action, and a connection to the outer world. From this Jungian viewpoint, desire, in its broadest sense, is an inherent and universal human drive. It's not just about physical or sexual longing, but a profound yearning for connection, meaning, wholeness, creativity, knowledge, and self-realization. This drive is equally present in both men and women, albeit expressed through different conscious and unconscious pathways due to societal conditioning and the influence of these contrasexual archetypes. Jung would argue that if a lack of female desire was indeed perceived in ancient Greece or any patriarchal society, it wasn't because women lacked the fundamental human capacity for eros or yearning. Instead, it was a direct consequence of the cultural repression of the animus's drive for active engagement, intellect, and assertion within women. When societal norms restrict women to domestic roles, suppress their intellectual curiosity, or deny their agency in the public sphere, the energies associated with their animus do not simply vanish. They are forced underground into the unconscious. This repression manifests in several ways. The active, striving intellectual desires, aspects of the animus that could lead a woman to philosophical inquiry, political action, or professional achievement are either denied expression, pathologized, or channeled into acceptable, often indirect forms. For example, a woman's suppressed intellectual desire might appear as an intense, unconscious drive for domestic perfection or over-involvement in the lives of others, rather than direct scholarly pursuit. The desire itself is still present, but its conscious manifestation is distorted or hidden. Jung would therefore reveal that the lack perceived by someone like Plato was a cultural blind spot, not a psychological reality. Women possess a full spectrum of desires, just as men do. The historical context simply did not provide the space or validation for the diverse expressions of female eros, particularly those associated with the animus's drive for active engagement with the world. Jung's archetypes provide a framework for understanding that these universal drives exist beyond rigid gender roles, even if societal structures attempt to confine or obscure them. The challenge, then, becomes one of integrating these repressed aspects for psychological wholeness, a process central to individuation. Building upon the understanding that female desire is a universal human drive, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow becomes crucial for understanding why it might appear hidden or lacking, as perhaps observed by figures like Plato. The shadow represents the aspects of our personality, both good and bad, that we have repressed or disowned because they are deemed unacceptable by our conscious ego or by societal norms. If female desire, particularly for autonomy, intellect, power, or active engagement in the world, was culturally suppressed in ancient Greece or any patriarchal society, it didn't vanish. Instead, it retreated into the collective and personal unconscious, forming a potent shadow complex. Jung would reveal that this repressed desire, rather than disappearing, would seek other, often indirect and sometimes problematic avenues for expression. One significant psychological consequence of such repression is the development of complexes. A complex is an emotionally charged group of ideas or images in the unconscious that are associated with a particular theme. If a woman's desire for intellectual recognition was suppressed, she might develop a complex around intelligence, leading to excessive self-criticism, fear of failure, or even a compensatory over-identification with roles that give her indirect intellectual power, e.g., in controlling domestic affairs with meticulous detail. These complexes can create inner conflict and psychological suffering as the denied desire struggles for conscious recognition. Furthermore, repressed desire can manifest through projections. A woman might unconsciously project her unexpressed desires onto others, admiring or resenting these qualities in men or other women. For instance, if her desire for adventure or freedom was deemed inappropriate, she might find herself intensely drawn to, or equally repelled by, individuals who embody those adventurous qualities, living vicariously through them or criticizing them for expressing what she herself has suppressed. This projection prevents her from integrating these desires into her own conscious personality, keeping them in the hidden realm of the shadow. From an archetypal perspective, this repressed desire might also find expression in myths, fairy tales, and dreams. Jung believed that these narratives often depict the struggles of the human psyche to integrate its disparate parts. A recurring dream theme of being trapped, striving to escape, or secretly wielding power could be an archetypal expression of a woman's repressed desires for freedom, agency, or influence. Figures in mythology like the defiant goddess, the wise sorceress, or the powerful queen, while sometimes demonized, also represent the suppressed aspects of feminine desire for power and autonomy that were denied expression in daily life. The long-term consequence of living with such a repressed shadow of desire is a sense of psychological imbalance or incompleteness. A woman might feel an inexplicable restlessness, a lack of fulfillment, or a vague longing, without understanding its source. This internal disharmony occurs because a vital part of herself, her active, assertive, intellectual or autonomous desires, remains unacknowledged and unintegrated. The lack, then, wasn't an inherent deficit in female desire, but a societal imposition that forced these desires into the unconscious, where they continued to exert their influence as a potent shadow, leading to various psychological symptoms. Jung's insight, therefore, reveals that the apparent absence of certain forms of female desire was a societal construct, leading to a psychological underground, where these desires continued to exist, manifesting in complex and often indirect ways. Understanding this shadow is crucial for psychological health, as the journey towards wholeness involves bringing these hidden desires into conscious awareness and integrating them into the full personality. Having explored how Plato's context might have led to a perceived hidden lack of female desire, and how Jung's shadow concept accounts for its repression, we arrive at the ultimate Jungian revelation. The reclamation and integration of female desire are fundamental to the process of individuation. Individuation, the central aim of Jungian analytical psychology, is the lifelong psychological process of differentiating the self from both the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious, resulting in a unique and integrated personality. It is the journey of becoming a truly whole individual, transcending the fragmented state of the ego. For women, particularly in societies that have historically suppressed their desires beyond traditional or domestic roles, individuation involves a conscious and often challenging process of bringing these hidden or repressed forms of desire into conscious awareness and integrating them into the full personality. This isn't merely about personal preference, it's about psychological necessity. A desire that remains in the shadow cannot contribute to the conscious personality, leaving a woman feeling incomplete, restless, or unconsciously driven. The individuation journey necessitates owning these desires, whether for knowledge, power, creativity, autonomy, adventure, or non-traditional forms of relationship, as legitimate and essential parts of her unique self. The desire in question here is broadly defined. It encompasses the animus's drive for active engagement with the world, for intellectual pursuit, for assertion of will, and for objective understanding. When these aspects of desire are recognized and embraced, a woman can overcome the limitations imposed by historical and societal expectations. For example, if a woman's desire for intellectual challenge was previously shamed or dismissed, consciously reclaiming this desire allows her to pursue education, engage in stimulating discourse, or build a career that fulfills this essential part of her being. This act of reclamation is a powerful step towards psychological wholeness, moving beyond what was once hidden. Moreover, the process of individuation demands that one confronts and integrates their own shadow. For women, this often means acknowledging and accepting the unladylike or unfeminine desires that society or even their own internalized beliefs taught them to repress. By bringing these desires into the light of consciousness, they cease to be sources of shame or unconscious drivers of behavior, and instead become conscious energies that can be channeled constructively. This allows for an authentic expression of self that is not dictated by external expectations, but by inner truth. Ultimately, Jung would reveal that the true measure of psychological health and completeness for a woman involves consciously acknowledging and embracing all aspects of her desire. This includes both her capacity for nurturing and connection, often associated with the conscious feminine, and her drive for action, intellect, and autonomy, often associated with the animus. By integrating these diverse forms of desire, a woman becomes more complete, more balanced, and more self-actualized. She transcends the historical limitations perceived by figures like Plato, proving that female desire is not only present, but is a vital, driving force in her journey towards becoming a truly whole and individuated individual. This holistic integration of desire leads to a profound sense of inner peace, empowerment, and authenticity. What are your thoughts on Plato's ancient insights versus Jung's profound revelations about female desire? Share your perspective in the comments below. Let's explore these timeless questions together.